We're now coming to something real. We've talked a lot about the ideal, and now we're going to deal with the reality and conflicts. We have discussed at length the basic purposes in the life of human beings to grow, establish a family, and take care of the natural world. Investing for a global entity allows us to feel valued and open to receiving support and protection from that global entity. It can be the family or a nation or even the world that is represented by the global entity. And the entity can be myself or my family or my nation. So at all levels, living for the sake of others is the basic principle needed for peace and happiness to reign on earth. However, this ideal of peace and happiness has never been realized so far on earth. Wars have taken place throughout history, and even after World War II, and then the fall of the Berlin Wall, when the hopes for peace were so high, new conflicts arose. The human desire for freedom and independence has given rise to more conflicts around the world between ethnic groups, societies, and in the families, going from dictatorial and paternalistic to mature and free societies appears to be a very painful process for all. These scriptures speak of a being divided between good and evil. So in Hinduism we read that the spirit is double, the pure and the impure. In Native American religion we read every person has a good heart and a bad heart. And in Christianity in Romans 7:15 we read, I don't do what I want, I do what I hate. These are words that St. Paul expressed in his letters to the Romans. So mankind has not been able to develop the original divine nature, unlike the selfish nature, which is obviously a sign of blatant immaturity. The sign of immaturity is being self-centered and having no goal that goes beyond oneself. We feel alienated and we feel like everything is owed to us. We belittle the world and feel miserable in the grip of internal and external conflicts. People who feel that way sometimes end up committing suicide. And it is in everyone's mind that this struggle takes place. Any thought, action, or word can lead us towards evil or good, depending on whether it is centered on the physical body and immediate needs, or on the spirit and the greater good. These conflicts are manifested around us. This phenomenon is also described in psychology, which depicts a dark and light part of the human being. The question of the origin of these conflicts arises. Were the human beings designed that way? Is this contradiction genetically inherent in our DNA? How can we transform this situation? So many questions arise, and there is still no scientific research in that field. There are several mythologies like the Pandora box, or sources like the Bible, which give more or less symbolic accounts of the beginning of evil. The extreme Oriental religions tend to consider a cyclical development of humanity but don't point out to a fall of man. For lack of scientific source, we will take a closer look at the biblical account. In Genesis, it is mentioned that Adam and Eve were tempted by an angel, symbolized by a snake, to eat the fruit of the only tree that God had forbidden them to eat, called the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which would cause them to die instantly. Eve was seduced by the archangel Lucifer, symbolized by the serpent. Then Adam was seduced by her, and they both ate of this forbidden fruit, thus disobeying the commandment. However, they didn't undergo sudden physical death as a result of their disobedience, but were cast out of the Garden of Eden and were bound to experience a life of suffering away from God's love. They formed a family in which their eldest son, Cain, killed his brother Abel out of jealousy. This story has been taken literally by many believers of the three Abrahamic religions. In the next presentation, we will examine the interpretation of this story according to the divine principle. Now to the questions of session 6. What do you do when you feel alienated or isolated? What is the ratio you would like to achieve between the time and energy you invest for others and for yourself, between 0 to 100 and 100 to 0? Where do you think the human contradiction of wanting to do good and doing evil stems from? Take a few minutes to look at these questions and write your answers.